They gathered under the dying light, faces tight with judgment and sweat, their shadows long and righteous across the dust. The chapel bell tolled like it rang for the dead, not the living. Clara May stood barefoot in the center of the square, her newborn cradled to her chest, the child swaddled in torn muslin and trembling against the sudden cool of dusk. No one looked her in the eye. Not her neighbor who once gave her bread. Not her aunt who whispered prayers into her hair as a child. Not even the preacher, who now read from his worn Bible with a voice that shook but never faltered. She hadn't spoken in hours. Her lips were cracked, her eyes red, but not from weeping. Clara May had cried herself dry weeks ago. When her belly swelled and the whispers started, she knew this day would come. She had hoped for mercy, a moment of human grace. But her hopes had been ground under the boots of the same men who once tipped their hats at her in town. The wages of sin, the preacher thundered, are death. But the Lord is merciful. His gaze flicked briefly to the baby. This one we shall not harm. But the mother, she must walk the path of repentance. Alone. Unwelcomed. Someone spat. Someone else murmured. She knew what she was doing. They had decided she would leave at first light. No trial. No escort. Just the edge of town and her own 2 feet. They'd given her a skin of water, half a loaf of bread, and instructions to walk west, away from the river, away from their clean, God-fearing community. She had begged them not for herself but for the child. She had asked only for shelter until her body healed. The midwife turned away. The sheriff kept his hand near his holster, as though even Clara's voice might offend the law. She had no father to stand for her, no husband to claim her, and so no right to remain. They did not care how the child came to be, only that it came without a ring on her finger. That night she did not sleep. She sat near the outskirts, in the shadow of the old blacksmith's barn, the baby wrapped tightly to her body, listening to the coyotes call to one another from the hills. Her body ached in places no one could see, and still she rocked gently, humming a lullaby her mother once sang. She named the child Hope, whispering it against her forehead like a prayer she wasn't sure God would hear. When the morning came she walked. The sheriff escorted her to the town's edge, his boots leaving clean prints in the dirt behind her. "Ain't personal," he said. Clara didn't answer. He offered her a last piece of advice. Keep to the ridge. Don't drink from still water. And if you hear drums, run. Then he turned his horse around and left her to the wind. The land beyond the town wasn't made for kindness. Dust rose with every step, the sun already angry overhead. Clara shifted the child from one arm to the other, her back screaming with each movement. Her shoes had worn through weeks ago, now her soles bled slowly into the ground. She passed no signs, no crossroads. Just scrub brush and bone. Somewhere far behind her, a hawk circled. The water skin was half gone by noon. Her lips blistered. Her milk dried up. The baby's cries were soft and pitiful, more breath than sound. As night fell on the second day, she found a dry creek bed and lay down, pulling the child to her chest. The stars above blinked cold and careless. Coyotes howled again, closer now. Clara pressed her forehead to the baby's, murmuring fragments of song, mouth too dry to form full words. When she closed her eyes, she imagined cool water, tall trees, the sound of fiddle strings. But sleep wouldn't take her. Footsteps did. They came softly, bare, deliberate. Not the sharp rhythm of boots, not the distant thrum of hooves. Clara opened her eyes to find a figure standing at the edge of the gully, silhouetted against the starlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in hide and shadow. A long braid fell over one shoulder, beads catching the moonlight. His face was painted, one half streaked in black, the other in red. In one hand he held a spear. In the other, nothing but patience. Clara reached instinctively for the child, clutching her tighter. Her breath came in shallow pulls. She couldn't run, couldn't fight, could barely speak. The figure stepped forward without urgency. His gaze swept over her, the baby, the half-dead water skin. Then he knelt beside her. "You are dying," he said, voice low and even, accented but clear. Clara blinked. Her tongue moved, but no sound came. "I am not here to hurt you." The child whimpered, and the man's eyes softened. He reached into a pouch at his belt and drew out something wrapped in cloth. It smelled faintly of herbs and honey. "Eat," he said. "Feed the little one too." Clara hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, she took the offering. He did not move closer. He sat with legs crossed, watching the stars as if they belonged to him. After a time he said, "I am called Taki." "You." "Clara?" she whispered. "Clara?" he repeated, nodding slowly. She studied his face, half-shadowed. There was something old in his eyes. Not age, something deeper. A sadness born of long losses. She expected him to demand something. All men did. But Taki asked nothing more. When the baby slept again, he offered his cloak, thick buffalo hide lined with fur, and gestured for her to follow him. They walked through the night, the desert hushed except for the whisper of wind against rock. Clara stumbled twice. Taki caught her both times without comment. When they crested a hill just before dawn, she saw firelight flickering below, half hidden among a ring of red stone. A small camp. 3 others. A boy tending to meat on a spit. A woman crushing herbs. An elder watching the sunrise like it owed him something. None of them looked surprised to see her. Taki said nothing. He simply gestured for her to sit. Water was placed in her hand before she could ask. The baby stirred. Clara drank and drank, each swallow a rebirth. The woman came forward. She examined Clara's face, her fingers gentle but firm, her voice speaking words Clara didn't understand but felt anyway. Stay, Taki said. Rest. Clara didn't answer. Her eyes burned. Her legs gave out. She sank to the ground and wept, not out of pain or fear but from the sudden, shattering release of being seen and not judged. The fire crackled. The sun bled over the horizon. Taki sat beside her, silent. She clutched her child close, heart hammering against fragile ribs. The taste of honey still lingered on her lips. For the first time since giving birth, Clara may let herself believe, just briefly, that maybe she and her daughter weren't meant to die alone in the dust. And somewhere far beyond the ridge, the hawk circled back. The days passed not in hours but in silences. Clara stayed within the bounds of the small camp, never wandering far from the circle of warmth the fire provided. It wasn't just the chill of the high desert that kept her close. It was the comfort, the unfamiliar safety that lingered in the way no one asked her questions she couldn't bear to answer. The woman who had examined her upon arrival was called Noma. She was sharp-eyed and quiet, her age difficult to place. She spoke little English but understood more than she let on. Every morning she brought Clara a mixture of roots steeped in hot water and pressed it into her hand with a nod. Each time Clara said thank you. Each time Noma replied only with her eyes. Taki had not spoken much since that first night. He rose before dawn, walked the perimeter, trained with his spear, then vanished over the ridge for hours at a time. When he returned, his shoulders carried meat or herbs or supplies Clara couldn't name. She watched him from a distance at first, the way he moved with unbroken purpose, as if the world's weight fit him like an old coat. His expression rarely changed. It remained carved in quiet resolve, only shifting when the baby laughed, a soft, delighted sound that Clara hadn't heard in days. At that, Taki's mouth would twitch, barely a smile but real. Hope adored him. Whenever he entered the camp, her little arms waved, her chubby fingers stretched toward him, demanding his attention with squeals and coos. He always paused, crouched beside her, and spoke in his native tongue, the cadence gentle and rhythmic. Clara listened without understanding, but it comforted her in a way English never had. Words didn't matter as much as intent. By the end of the first week, Clara had begun helping where she could. Noma showed her how to grind herbs, how to dry strips of meat, how to wrap bandages made of deer hide and tree bark. The boy, his name was Sani, taught her how to start a fire with flint and steel. Clara took it all in with a hunger she hadn't known she possessed. Her body still ached in small, persistent ways, but the hollow inside her, the place that shame had carved open, began to fill with something new. Each night, she sat beside Taki while Hope slept curled in a woven basket lined with fur. They rarely spoke much, but when they did, their conversations came slow and careful, like two people building a bridge out of twigs and trust. One evening she asked, "Why did you help me?" Taki stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I knew what it meant to be left behind." She waited. When he didn't continue, she didn't press. Later, under the stars, he told her more. "When I was young, I rode with warriors. We protected our land, our people. But war changes the shape of a man. My brothers, they died believing in something that burned away." He looked down at his hands. "I began helping those the tribe cast out. Settlers. Women. Children. It made me an outcast too." "You were banished?" "No," he said. "I left." Clara nodded, the ache behind her ribs sharp with familiarity. "It's worse when they don't even have to force you out. When you just walk away because staying hurts more." Taki glanced at her then. Really looked. Yes. There was no need for more. In that silence, something passed between them, an understanding born not of shared language but of shared loss. The days grew warmer. The baby grew stronger. Her cheeks filled out, her cries more confident. Clara laughed more now, small laughs, unsure but real. She began to braid her hair again. She wore soft leather moccasins Noma made for her. Her face began to change too, less hollow, more defined. She caught her reflection in a pool of water one morning and didn't recognize herself. She looked alive. But peace never lingers long in the wild. It began with smoke. A thin thread curling up beyond the far ridge, faint but deliberate. Taki saw it first. He stood suddenly, tense, eyes narrowing. "Someone's near," he said. "Could it be another camp?" Clara asked. "Not ours. Cavalry maybe. Or bounty hunters." Clara's blood went cold. She stepped instinctively in front of the basket where Hope slept. Taki put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll move at dusk." They broke camp quickly. Noma and Sani knew what to do without being told. Packs were lightened, fire buried, tracks erased. Taki led them south, through dry gulches and between steep canyons. Clara carried Hope in a sling tied across her chest, every muscle taut with adrenaline. They traveled for hours, stopping only when the sun dipped low enough to hide their passage. That night, they made camp beneath a rock outcrop shaped like a broken tooth. Taki said little. He sharpened his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Clara watched the baby sleep, then turned to him. "Do you think they're looking for me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "There is always someone looking for someone." She lay awake most of the night, ears straining for hoofbeats, for rustling brush. Nothing came. But by the next evening, Taki confirmed it. Someone was tracking them. He found a footprint in the sand, boot heel heavy, angled wrong for a hunter. And tobacco rolled, burnt, left near the spring they'd visited days before. Not Comanche. Not drifter. This was a man who wanted to be followed. Taki's eyes grew dark with thought. Bounty hunter. Why? Clara asked, voice tight. Taki shook his head. Could be coin. Could be something else. She knew. Deep down she knew. Clara had seen the way Jed Hawthorne looked at her once years ago. The man had a hunger in his eyes that didn't belong to anything living. He had courted her mother in secret, traded whiskey for promises he never kept. When her mother died, Clara was 16, and Jed had turned his attention to her. She'd refused him. Days later he left town. She had hoped she'd never see him again. Hope stirred against her chest, fingers twitching. Clara pressed her lips to the child's forehead. "I won't let them take you." Taki's voice cut through the dark. "Then you must be ready to fight." Clara didn't answer. But she didn't need to. Her silence said enough. The next morning they climbed higher into the hills, seeking old trails known only to those who'd lived outside maps. Taki's band moved like smoke, quiet, quick, invisible. But the sense of danger thickened with every step. Birds flew suddenly. Coyotes fell silent. At dusk the air smelled of iron and fire. When they reached a cliffside that overlooked a valley of red stone and mesquite, Taki paused. "We'll stay here tonight." Clara knelt and unwrapped Hope, who babbled cheerfully despite the tension. Noma took the child and rocked her gently while Clara watched the horizon. The sun had gone blood orange. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. That evening, as she helped Taki prepare snares and mark lookout points, she finally asked him the question that had been clawing at her since the first sight of smoke. "What happens if they find us?" Taki wiped his blade clean and met her gaze. "Then we make them wish they hadn't." She held his stare for a long moment. "I'm not afraid to shoot." "I know." The wind picked up, brushing strands of her hair across her face. She pushed them back, jaw set. He studied her for a heartbeat more, then said, "You are stronger than you know, Clara May." She looked down at her hands, scarred, dry, still shaking slightly. But they had held her child, fed her, protected her. They had not broken. "I'm learning." Taki nodded once. "Good. We may not have much time." They sat beside each other that night while the others slept. The fire between them flickered low, just enough to keep the dark at bay. Taki broke the quiet. "When this is over, where will you go?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Where no one knows my name. Where my daughter can laugh without people spitting on the ground." "You could come west with us," he said. "To the forests." "Would I be welcome?" He met her eyes. "You already are." She didn't reply. But she smiled, small and tired, and it reached her eyes. And far below, in the lowlands of the valley, a figure watched them from the dark, one hand on his rifle, the other clutching a scrap of cloth he'd found days earlier in the dust. A baby's blanket. He raised it to his face, breathing in the faintest trace of perfume, then tucked it into his coat. He'd found her trail. And he wasn't far behind. The third morning on the ridge came with a cold that bit straight through Clara's bones. Mist clung to the sparse shrubs like ghosts reluctant to leave, and every sound felt louder, each crunch of dry dirt underfoot, each shift of saddle leather. The group moved cautiously, more alert than ever. Taki said little, but Clara noticed the way he scanned the horizon more often, how his hand hovered closer to his weapon even during brief rests. The air was thick with tension, and even Hope sensed it. She whimpered more now, restless and clingy, unwilling to leave her mother's arms for even a moment. They traveled west, winding through narrow canyons, avoiding open valleys. Taki had chosen a route known only to scouts and spirits. Still, the unease grew with every step. Something was behind them. Something deliberate. At midday, they paused to refill their water skins by a spring that trickled out from a cracked stone face. Clara knelt, holding Hope in one arm while trying to keep her balance on the slick rocks. Sonny stood nearby, scanning the rear trail. When Clara glanced over her shoulder, she caught a strange expression on the boy's face, part wonder, part fear. Before she could ask, Taki's voice cut in, low and clipped. "We have to move." Clara rose slowly. "You saw them?" "Not yet," he said. "But I feel them. Close." And so they moved again, faster this time, weaving through the terrain with practiced urgency. Clara struggled to keep pace while cradling Hope, her boots catching on loose stones. Noma reached out once, offering to carry the baby, but Clara shook her head. She didn't want to risk anything. Not now. Not with that old shadow crawling closer. The descent into the ravine was steep, carved into the land by some ancient river long gone dry. They climbed down hand over hand, passing packs first, then themselves. Clara's arms trembled from effort, but she didn't falter. Not with Hope strapped to her. Not with whatever was following them so close behind. At the bottom, the group paused for breath. Taki crouched beside a cluster of rocks, touching the earth with 2 fingers, then lifting them to his nose. His brow furrowed. "He's near," he said. Clara didn't ask how he knew. She didn't need to. They pressed on, moving through a narrow gash in the land. The walls on either side rose high, jagged with sandstone and sagebrush. It felt like walking into a trap. Clara's fingers gripped the revolver tucked into her belt, a weapon Taki had handed her 2 days ago with a single piece of advice. Don't aim unless you're ready to end it. By nightfall, they made camp in the shadow of a large overhang. It offered shelter from wind, but little else. No fire tonight. No singing from Sonny. Only silence, broken by Hope's soft hiccups and the occasional shift of stone. Clara sat with her back against the rock, Hope asleep in her lap. Taki remained on watch, perched above on a ledge like a hawk guarding its nest. Sonny dozed fitfully. Noma braided leather strips into something long and thin, a binding or maybe a snare. Clara whispered to the dark, "He's not going to stop." Taki's voice answered from above. "No." She stared into the black beyond the ledge. "It's Jet, isn't it?" "Yes. I thought he'd leave me alone. After what they did, after I was gone." "He doesn't want justice," Taki said. "He wants possession." Clara exhaled slowly, rage stirring beneath her ribs like hot coal. "He tried to marry my mother. When she refused, he waited until she was sick, and then he came for me. I ran. I thought that would be enough." "It never is," Taki said. Silence hung between them. And then Clara asked, "Why does he want her? Why Hope?" Taki hesitated. Then, "Because she proves he doesn't own you." The truth settled like iron in her chest. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt something raw and old rise up inside her. Something angry. Not fear. Not grief. Fire. The next morning they didn't travel. Taki had found boot prints on the ridge, fresh and careless. Whoever was following them wasn't hiding anymore. That meant one thing, he was confident. Taki laid out a plan. "We draw him in. Here. On our ground." Clara blinked. "You want to fight?" "I want to end it." She nodded. "Then I want to help." He looked at her. Not with pity. Not with worry. With respect. "You'll have your chance," he said. The trap took hours to prepare. Sonny and Noma worked in tandem, weaving ropes through the underbrush, hiding stakes, masking footprints. Taki chose the exact spot where the canyon narrowed, a bottleneck that could only be crossed on foot. A perfect kill box. But even with the trap in place, Clara felt the weight of the coming fight like a storm on the horizon. She spent the afternoon sharpening her focus. Feeding Hope. Cleaning the revolver. Practicing loading it with hands that only shook a little. She'd fired a gun before, once to scare off coyotes. But this would be different. This would be real. As dusk fell, Taki pulled her aside. If something happens, if he gets past us, you take Sani and Noma and run. She frowned. What about you? I'll hold him. No, she said firmly. We do this together. He held her gaze, then nodded. When the sun vanished, so did the light. Moonless night. Crickets loud. The wind carried a smell, tobacco, sweat, leather. Clara's heart beat fast and hard. Every breath tasted like iron. And then, footsteps. Not rushed. Not panicked. Confident. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the narrow gap. Clara saw the outline of a long coat, a rifle slung over one shoulder, and the glint of something metallic at his hip. Jed Hawthorne. His voice cut through the stillness, smooth as spoiled whiskey. Clara May. That you, girl? Clara stepped forward. Her fingers were steady. Her voice was low. You should turn around, Jed. He chuckled. You think hiding with savages makes you strong? You forget where you came from. I didn't forget, she said. I just stopped letting it define me. Jed stepped closer. You've got something that belongs to me. Clara's eyes narrowed. She never did. He moved fast, reaching for his rifle. But Clara was faster. Her revolver barked once, then twice. Jed stumbled, dropping the rifle. Screaming, swearing. The first shot had grazed his arm. The second hit his leg. He collapsed, clutching the wound. Taki moved in, silent as death. His spear flashed in the moonlight, leveled inches from Jed's throat. Clara approached slowly, hope wailing in the distance. Jed's eyes locked on her, wild and bloodshot. You think this makes you free? She knelt beside him. No. But it means you're done chasing me. Jed sneered. You ain't got the guts. She leveled the revolver. Her hands no longer shook. Taki spoke softly. Let him live. Let him carry his shame. Clara hesitated, then lowered the weapon. Jed lay there, bleeding, broken, silent now. Taki leaned close to whisper something Clara didn't catch. Whatever it was, Jed's face went pale. By dawn, they'd left him behind, his horse released, his rifle broken. The sun rose on a canyon washed clean by blood and resolve. As the light warmed her skin, Clara looked down at Hope, who blinked sleepily at the world. Her fingers brushed the baby's cheek. She won't grow up afraid, Clara whispered. Taki nodded beside her. No, he said. She'll grow up free. The firelight flickered against the red rock walls as dusk fell over the mesa, casting long shadows that swayed like ancient spirits watching in silence. Clara sat near the flames, her arms wrapped around Hope, who slept with her tiny hand curled against her mother's neck. The battle was over, but the echoes of it had not left her. She could still feel the pull of the trigger in her fingers, the sound of Jed's voice seared into her memory. But something was different now. Not just around her, within her. Taki had not spoken much since they left Jed bleeding in the canyon. He had watched the horizon like it held the answer to something he hadn't yet dared to ask. Sani was quieter too, though he occasionally glanced Clara's way with a reverence that hadn't been there before. Noma, ever practical, continued to lead them west, toward a Comanche settlement tucked deep in the shelter of high hills. A place, Taki said, where they could rest. Begin again. Clara wasn't sure what beginning meant anymore. Not when so much had ended. She looked down at her daughter. Hope stirred and let out a soft coo, the sound fragile and sweet. That single sound was her anchor now, pulling her back from the place inside that wanted to collapse, to weep, to run. Now she thought. Never again. That girl, the one who ran and cowered and waited to be saved, she died back in that canyon. Taki approached, settling beside her without a word. He offered a thin strip of dried venison. Clara shook her head. You need strength, he said softly. I need answers. His gaze remained on the fire. Ask. Why did you help me? She asked. You could have turned away like everyone else. I've seen too many mothers abandoned, he said. Too many children buried nameless. I wouldn't watch it happen again. She studied his profile, etched with lines of wind and war and something deeper. You lost someone. He nodded. A sister. She bore a child of a soldier. The tribe feared the blood was impure. She was exiled. She died alone. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. She was stronger than they knew, he said. And so are you. A silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Night insects began their low, rhythmic chant. It was peaceful, almost. Then Sani sprinted back from the slope above, eyes wide, his breath coming fast. Riders. 3. Maybe 4. Coming fast. Clara felt her gut twist. Jed. Taki shook his head. He wouldn't have healed enough. But he could have sent others. We run. Noma asked. Taki's eyes narrowed. No. We draw them out. Clara stood, shifting hope into the sling on her chest. I'll do it. You've done enough. I've just begun. Taki stared at her a moment, then gave a slow nod. They moved quickly, splitting into positions with the grace of practiced warriors. Taki vanished into the dark, bow in hand. Noma took higher ground, rifle cocked. Sani remained at the edge of the firelight, bait. Clara stood in the center, exposed and unarmed, hope held close against her heart. She stared into the dark, forcing her breathing to slow. Every instinct screamed to hide. But she held her ground. The riders came fast and loud, hooves pounding like war drums. 3 shapes burst into the firelight, hard men draped in trail dust and leather, pistols out, eyes sharp. The one in front, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his mouth, raised his weapon. Where's the girl? He barked. Clara didn't flinch. She's not a girl. And she's not yours. The man snorted. You're Clara, ain't you? Jed said you'd run off with some redskin and a bastard child. Thought maybe you were worth some coin. Turn around now, she said, voice steady, and you'll leave with your life. He laughed. Lady, I've put better men in the ground for less. A whisper of wind moved through the trees, and then a sudden thwip sound split the air. The man dropped to his knees, an arrow embedded in his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Gunshots rang out. Noma fired from above, taking out the second rider with a clean shot to the chest. The third tried to bolt, but Sani leapt from behind a rock and tackled him, wrestling the weapon free with the fury of someone defending his home. Taki dropped from a ledge and dragged the wounded leader away from Clara, pressing a blade to his throat. Clara didn't move. Hope was still asleep against her chest. When the dust settled, the man groaned beneath Taki's knee. Clara stepped closer. Who sent you? She asked. The man spat blood. Doesn't matter now. Clara crouched beside him. It does to me. He'll keep sending them, the man said. Jed's rich. Angry. And he don't forget. Clara looked at Taki. Let him ride. Make sure he tells Jed what happened here. Taki didn't look pleased. Mercy is dangerous. So is silence, Clara said. He'll ride faster with fear in his gut. Taki held her gaze, then nodded. He bound the man's wounds, gave him water, and set him on a horse with no weapons and a single warning. If you return, you won't leave again. The man didn't look back. That night, the fire burned brighter. Noma cooked a stew from dried beans and squirrel meat. Sani told stories in broken Spanish and Comanche, mixing jokes with warnings. Taki said little, but he watched Clara with something like pride in his eyes. When the stars came out, Clara rocked Hope in her arms and whispered to her softly. You were born into fire, she said. But you'll grow in light. Hope's eyelids fluttered. She was safe. For now. By morning they reached the Comanche camp. It was nestled between 2 ridges, hidden by trees and boulders. Women in long skirts gathered at the edge watching. Children peeked from behind elders, curious and cautious. One older man stepped forward, a chief by the way others parted for him. Taki spoke in Comanche, voice low and firm. The chief studied Clara, then looked down at Hope. He said a single word, Nachi. Survivor. He turned and led them in. Clara didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Jed would come again, or if some other shadow would try to steal what little peace she'd found. But she knew one thing with utter certainty. She wasn't alone anymore. She walked through the village with Taki beside her, Hope pressed close and Sani and Noma trailing behind. A makeshift family forged in blood and fire. She had been cast out. Now she stood upright. A woman reborn. And if the past came for her again, it would find her waiting, unafraid. She looked up at the sky, where hawks circled wide above the hills, and whispered to the wind, Try me,